Emin, I can't believe you're turning 35. You're getting older all the time. But you're a winner, you're a champ, you're great at real estate, and boy, can you entertain.
We're learning more about the relationship between President Trump and the father-son pair who offered to provide the Trump campaign dirt on Hillary Clinton straight from the Russian government. Emin Agalarov is a Russian pop singer who says he first met Trump about 4 years ago when he traveled to Las Vegas to discuss hosting the Miss Universe pageant at his family-owned concert hall in Moscow. Traveling with him, his father, Aras, an oligarch and real estate developer with close ties to Vladimir Putin, who's built an estimated $2 billion fortune thanks in part to Russian government-funded construction projects. The Agalarovs certainly appear to have grown close to Trump and his family. That's them partying together at Miss Universe in Moscow in 2013, though Donald Trump Jr. sought this week to downplay the relationship.
They had the pageant, and they're successful real estate developers over there. So, that's the extent of, my knowledge with them. I'd met Emin once or twice, and, maintained a casual relationship there, talked about some potential deals, and that's about the extent of it. They really didn't go anywhere.
That's not the story that Emin Agalarov is telling. He says he's very close to the Trump family, even exchanged messages with Don Jr. around the time of the inauguration. The president himself appears particularly close to the Agalarovs. He has regularly heaped praise on Emin, even appearing in one of his music videos. That's Trump and Emin at Trump Tower shortly before Trump announced his presidential candidacy. There's Trump and Emin at Trump's Doral Golf Resort after Emin performed on stage. And there's Emin with Ivanka Trump in 2014 when she flew to Moscow to check out sites for Trump Tower Moscow, which was to be built with the Agalarovs. When Trump won the general election, the Agalarovs sent along their congratulations. The president-elect, Emin claims, responded with a handwritten note of gratitude. Joining me now, Adam Davidson, staff writer at The New Yorker. The reason I want to talk to you is because the last time that you and I talked, we were just hanging out and talking shop, and you were telling me about this. You were like, there's this pop singer and his dad. And I remember thinking, it's kind of a weird sort of thing. Like, who are these people and why are they close to the Trumps?
So the Agalarovs are, they're fascinating because they unite two of the worlds of Russian oligarchy. So Aras Agalarov is from Azerbaijan, from Baku, Azerbaijan. And as one political scientist told me, Azerbaijan is almost like a caricature of Russian oligarchy.
Right.
I mean, a thoroughly corrupt, fully, deeply, profoundly, openly, nakedly corrupt nation with, I should say, some people there have close ties to Donald Trump and his company. And Aras Agalarov left there in, I think, '98 to go to Moscow, where he became really a top-tier, a Russia-level oligarch, so a multi-billionaire, obviously with deep ties in Central Asia. He built this mall, fairgrounds, real estate business with very close ties to the Putin administration. His son claims, it is amazing how many of these folks say, oh, I just happened to call Donald Trump. I just happened to meet him. His son, Emin, as you know, because I told you socially, I went and interviewed him a few weeks ago. He was in the U.S. on a concert tour where he was basically paying a large PR staff to promote him as a major potential American singer.
It's also funny that happened before all this came out, because he would have a very different press tour now.
It probably would work better. I mean, he's not the best. He's a solid singer. Like, it's, poppy.
I've watched some of the videos.
Yeah, all right.
Okay,
I mean, it's fine. Yeah. Anyway, so I went to interview him, and as you know, I pretended to be a pop music journalist. I mean, I was asking I asked someone at The New Yorker who knows about pop music to write some questions for me. And then I asked him about the relationship with the Trumps. And he said he just loved Donald Trump so much when he was young, and he read his book, and he dreamed of being like Donald Trump. This is Emin, the son. And so he reached out to Donald Trump through the Miss Universe organization. I'm skeptical simply because the Agalarovs are close to so many other people.
Yeah, so wait, I just want to be clear. Okay. The story here about the nature of the origin of this relationship is that just like plucky Emin, having read Donald Trump's book, just reaches out of the blue.
Right, exactly. Like, I just love the guy, I reached out of the blue. And this comes up again and again and again. And often the same group of Russian names, Russian emigre names, appear in these stories. So there's a guy, Tamir Sapir, who was another wildly wealthy Russian who lived in Brooklyn and then Manhattan, who seems to be at the center of a lot of this, who has close ties to Agalarov and close ties to Trump for many years, as well as close ties probably to Russian mob officials. There's also a guy named Lev Levayev, who another Russian ex-oligarch who made a fortune with diamonds in Israel. So there's a group of people who appear often over the last decade or two in Trump's orbit who are also in the Putin orbit.
Okay, so this is why this is so significant to me, because we've seen so much reporting like, oh, he has these Russia ties and he did miss University of Moscow. And I kept watching all these stories and reporting some of them and thinking like, okay, yeah. And then there's another thing happening, which is the Russians, hacked the DNC and John Podesta's and they wanted to get Trump elected. But, it's possible those two things both are just true as independent parallel channels. That email is the first evidence of a nexus between the two.
Exactly. And
which strikes me as a big deal.
Yeah, it's a very big deal. And as you know, I've been arguing for months now that will be the nexus, that somehow, if you think of who Donald Trump was in 2012, 2013, he was somebody very desperate for deals with people who were not going to ask too many questions about, will you actually pull off this deal? And Donald Trump had proved himself to be someone who is very eager to work with people who have a lot of money, willing to spend the money, who others might not be willing to work with. And I think that mess of stuff is where this nexus came.
All right, Adam Davison, thanks for your time tonight.
Thank you so much, Chris.